A very good afternoon to you all. My name is Lazarus Amukeshe, and welcome again to another episode of the Namibia Conversation. And today we're doing a part two of a conversation that we had before, where we're basically looking at local authorities and small towns in Namibia. I think for those that joined the previous conversation, you saw we were joined by Rieta van der Schijf and Moses Machai. For those that didn't manage to watch that episode, we had said Rieta, just as an introduction, Rieta is a senior international economic and social development impact advisor. She's done wonderful work in New York, in London, and she had also done work in Namibia. Rieta, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lazarus. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you too.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We're also joined by Moses Machai. Moses is CEO of Chiwarongo Town Council and the president of the Namibian Local Authority Officials. Moses is also on the call, but we're having a little bit of connection issues with him. But I'm sure as we progress, he will join us shortly. Just to sort of give a breakdown for those that are only joining, not the breakdown, but rather just a replay of what we had spoken about the last time. It was to really establish to say, are small towns in Namibia, for example, necessary, or should all people migrate to the big economic hubs like your Windhoek, your Walvis Bay, your Swakopmund, where economic activities is kind of happening, and then have all those people come to these hubs and then kind of do away with the smaller towns? Because I think in my view, which Rieta did not quite agree with, I had stated that for me, small towns rather are just to go there, pick up my biltong and a drink, and then proceed to wherever I'm going. But yeah, just coming back to the conversation today. Today, I ideally want to really talk about these small towns. Normally, they are not considered that important, in as much as they are important. But today, really, we want to talk about how to transform these small towns and local authorities into something and very economically valuable to the country. So just to sort of start off with you, Rieta, I think you've done much work on this space, and I really want to get your understanding on when you say we need to transform these towns, what do you really mean by transforming them? And I also want you to give me an example of where you have seen this transformation playing out as well.
So, Lazarus, the connection is not so great. Do you mind just kind of repeating the question? I couldn't hear the question so well.
Okay. Sorry for that. So the question was basically to talk about transformation. When you talk about transforming, say, a small town, what does it mean?
Okay, great. So I think it is a very important place to start, as you can say, Lazarus. And sorry, I'm just checking. You can hear me well, right? You can hear my good well.
Perfectly well.
So first of all, I think I'm going to kind of answer your question through the notion to first start with explaining to the audience, and perhaps for our purpose of discussion, a common understanding of what a town transformation actually means.
Yeah.
So what is it, and when should it really apply? So a town transformation is really kind of something that you can compare towards or to a turnaround strategy of a company. So when a company starts kind of underperforming, it's in the normal course of business, you have a strategy, but when it starts going really bad, you have a turnaround strategy. And a town transformation really is exactly the same thing. So it's where a town's future is now at risk. And you need to do something very deliberate to actually create a future for that town. So what I'm saying through that, it's a deliberate program of work. It's not going to happen organically. And it's highly specialized. So it's almost like an intervention that you're undertaking, whereby then your purpose is either to create or to resuscitate a future for the town on both economic metrics, but also on socioeconomic metrics. And when a town transformation really should apply is where the town is either experience the toxic shock. So if there's something, sorry?
Rieta, sorry just to stop you. I think Moses is trying to join in. Moses, are you there? Can you hear us?
It looks like it.
Okay, you can proceed while we're waiting on Moses.
So when it applies, so sorry, just to pick up from that point, is it should apply where the town is becoming now really a destitute or a feral town. And that means either the town has experienced a toxic shock, so like say a natural disaster of some sort or collapse of a major industry. So something significant has happened. And now all of a sudden you need this turnaround. The less obvious situation is where there's been slow decline. So slowly people have kind of migrated out of the town. So slowly the town has become less and less sustainable. And therefore now it comes to a certain point of risk where it's actually, as we said, in either need to actually kind of break down the town entirely or to actually resuscitate it and therefore requiring a town transformation.
Okay, perfect. Let's see if we can try and get hold of Moses. Moses, are you there?
It looks like Moses is on mute, so potentially that's...
Yes, I am here.
There you go. Wonderful.
Perfect.
Hello, Moses.
Hi, everybody.
Okay. So Moses, before you joined, and we just given a little bit of break, or rather a replay of what we had the previous time, and where we really spoke about the importance of small towns and also the importance of big towns. I think you've given us quite the detailed understanding as well of why these towns are necessary. And I was just asking Reda as well to give us a little bit of an explanation, really, when we say we want to see transformation, for example, in Namibian local authorities and small towns. What are we really talking to? And what I'm getting from here is when we're talking about a transformation of a small town, local authorities, basically trying to bring life back to such a small town or local authority. And I think you, during your time at the Otavi Town Council, I think that's what you had done as well. So maybe just to give you 2 cents as well on what you understand, because I think she's coming from an advisor perspective, but also the person that is particularly involved in these kind of things. What does it really mean when we're talking about town transformation? Moses, are you there?
My apologies.
Connection is like really.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Now I can hear you.
Am I audible?
Yes, now you're
Perhaps,
audible.
yes. Thank you very much. If you could probably just rephrase the statement, because you were not really very clear. It was a bit vague on my side, so I could not hear very clear what the discussion was. Yes, I may have missed some.
Okay, perfect. I'll be happy to do that. So, like I said, before you joined in, we were just trying to really understand what it means when we're talking about a local authority or town, a smaller town being transformed. What are we talking about? And what I was getting from Rieda's explanation was is actually to bring life back into a smaller town or local authority. And Reda, I think's explanation was coming more from an advice perspective, but I also wanted to get somebody that is actively involved in the town transformation in Namibia. I think you have done that during your stay at the Otavi Town Council as well, now in the Chivarango Town Council.
Yes, if I get you correctly with specific areas, the understanding of local economies as well as smaller towns, surviving is need to be looked at from a history perspective, where most of the institutions or local authorities were actually generated around a certain economic activity. Specifically, for example, most towns were generated around a mining sector that would provide employment, that would provide economic activities, such as, support systems and auxiliary services, or a certain logistic railway line that passed through in order to provide for transportation of goods and the others. And this is how many of the local authorities have actually came into existence. But fast forward into the current trend, you'd realize that this is more of an economic drive in terms of pull factors and push factors that would drive you away from the village setup that is known within an African context into a more of an urban setup. And this is how local economies starts to grow with issues that relates to urban movement of people that comes around, and it gives rise to the need for one to start conforming or one to start complying to the economic setup of a system that has been set. And that would mean having more plant infrastructures, more plant ovens, more potable water and sewer that would not necessarily be available in a traditional setup.
Okay.
These are, I think, instigators of local economies.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm getting from you, I think it's even good that you've given in that side, because I think Rieda, we didn't do quite enough justice to it to really get also the history part into the picture. And now, if we are now to say we are going to transform Namibian small towns and local authorities, I think then what would then be the defining parameters to say, okay, now this is a transformed town? When is it that we can correctly classify and say, okay, Otavi is now a transformed town council, for example?
Do you mind if I
Yes.
answer that
Yes,
first?
Greta,
Then
yes.
kind of invite Moses to challenge or comment or compliment that.
Yeah.
I think first of all, as Moses kind of brings a very important point to the table that is quite important for all of us to qualify that when we refer to small towns, they're not all the same thing.
Yeah.
So Moses last time also went and very clearly explained to us the kind of hierarchies of how councils go from settlements straight through to city councils like Winter.
Yeah.
So on the same basis, when we are talking here about town transformations, we're not talking just about very small rural villages. We're speaking up to kind of towns like Oranjemund or Karabib or medium-sized towns as well. And therefore, the answers that I want to suggest is going to be slightly more generic, but that the specific criteria that will qualify a town or a village to be sustainable will differ. But at least from my perspective, to give generic response to your question is that one should look at quantitative and qualitative measures. So the first point was like, what can you actually physically prove? And then the other measure is what can you sense? What can you observe? Which is not so easily measurable, but at least you know that there's certain outcomes on that. On the quantitative side, I think one thing that is going to evidence that a town is sustainable is that your council is viable. So can the council continuously provide services at an affordable level and continue to actually support its citizens in an affordable way? So getting to that level is not as simple as it sounds. I'd love to hear Moses's view on that. Two, I think there needs to be, for a town to be sustainable, depending on the size of the town and the nature of the town, there must be a high degree of job security. At the end of the day, humans look for work that can allow them to support their families and live a decent and respectable life. So for a town to be sustainable, that is a very important criteria to look at. Then the third component, which I think is not so easy, especially in the smaller towns that Moses was referring to, is need an element of access to decent education and healthcare. That doesn't mean to say that the town itself has to provide it, but its citizens must have access to that in a reasonable way. And then there's two that's perhaps for me less obvious, but what we see is what is happening in Namibia, at least, why towns are not sustainable and therefore should be a criteria to become sustainable, is there needs to be high levels of circularity. So the mining towns that Moses referred to, it's a lot of wealth sitting in those towns, but that wealth leaves the town. It gets invested in Windhoek, it gets invested in Broad, it gets invested in South Africa, but little of that money flows in that local community. The mines provide housing, the mines provide services, so the money doesn't stay there. So a sustainable town is where that money moves around its citizens quite a lot. And then the sixth criteria that I will use is there needs to be high levels of local investment. If your local investors are not investing, it's telling you something about that town. Because external investors can come and go, and you make yourself available to high levels of risk if your economy doesn't have a high level of local investors, even if it's small scale, but they provide your bottom line fiber. And then my last component that I kind of say, which is more on the qualitative side, is that you have to have local pride. So it's a harder one to prove, But a town becomes sustainable if the people care about where they live. They care about making that home. They care about the environment there. They care about keeping it clean. They care about violence in the area. So those are just some that I think are generic. Exactly how they apply will vary from town to town. But I'd love to hear what Moses has to add to that or challenge to that.
Okay. Moses, before I quickly come to you, we've got... so we are allowing outsiders to also participate in the conversation. We've got Paul joining us on the line. Paul, I'm going to come back to you. Just give me a couple of minutes. But Moses, let's quickly come back to you. Given what Rieta has just said now, have you, while scanning through the whole Namibia, have you seen, according to their criteria, a transform town where you've got job security, we've got decent education and decent healthcare, and also local investments, that is someone has grown roots in that local particular economy?
Of course, what has actually been said by Reta is quite very comprehensive in terms of what would be requiring a sustainable, town or city or village, what have you. But from a point of operationalization, of understanding the whole aspect, there are certain criteria that are key factors that actually would sustain, that would actually be the determinant to how a local authority can be sustainable. For example, for a council to be seen to be sustainable, they need to have a roadmap that needs to be very clear and must have priorities and deliverables, and that must come from top, which actually must define the strategic approach and strategies that they need to have. And I think from a perspective of a Namibian context, you'd realize that our sector is quite highly polarized, politically polarized, in such a way that it's more of a popularity contest than a meritocratic contest, because it's the popular guy that wins the vote who must actually come and run governance issues at the very local authority. So in that instance, I think for one to have a successful or sustainable town or city, there is a need for at least a focus in what direction that local authority will have to go, understanding its dynamics and its indexes. I think that is one. On a second note, of course, there needs to be, like I said, a prominent visibility of leadership presence that inspires and oversees a coordinated strategic process in economic regeneration. These are precursors and very, very key prerequisites to, a sustainable city. Without a roadmap, without a strategy, without understanding your internal issues and your external environment, we would not be speaking to a city that would want to be sustainable.
Okay.
Of course, the process of stakeholder engagement is quite key in understanding what are the needs in the dynamism of those that you actually serve. You've got business communities, you've got SME development, you have aspects like inhabitants who are just residents, you've got communities like the elderly who you need to understand what are their needs that they need to actually take care of. In that instance, a stakeholders, engagement that is robust, that is driven, that necessarily need to speak to the priorities of the people, would speak to a sustainable development approach. And definitely a developmental link to enhance coordination, which is more of a cooperative approach. Here we're talking about issues related to genuine political commitment, local economic development initiatives.
Okay.
This would be able to define a growth pattern within a local authority.
Okay.
And in defining the sustainability is not only just relevant to that, but there are legal frameworks that definitely describes and understands or defines what level and how that local authority is actually declared.
Okay, perfect.
So within that context,
Moses,
all
sorry.
encompassed, and I'll definitely put through what Reta said would be the same.
Okay, sorry. Let me cut you off there. Mr. Paul, welcome to the show. Maybe just to hear from you, what is your contribution to the topic at the end? Or if you have a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Josie. for giving me this platform. I've been hearing, listening to you, wonderful speakers, from Rita to my brother Moses, for your input. It's very, very interesting to see that you're coming up with this kind of platform to share ideas on how we can elevate or either come up with ideas how can we develop our environment, physical township or towns, let me say like that.
Yeah.
I'm here joining you guys just to listen and get the perspective, your perspective first, before I come in with my view regarding this specific topic we are engaging upon.
Okay, perfect.
For now, I'll just listen from you. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I think just moving the conversation ahead, Moses, you've talked about. I still want to come back to you. I think you're not really answering what I'm asking. You're giving me correct context, but I'm looking for specific answers, right? You've spoken about leadership, for example. That is such a very key and important thing. You've spoken about how the popular guys normally tend to win and then they tend to lead when sometimes they don't even know what they're doing. But I still want to come back and ask you the question without pointing fingers. I think you are the president of the National Local Authorities officials, and I think you have quite a good idea of where we are in terms of transforming these towns. I still want to come back to you. I think we must at least pick out one, right? At least if you have seen it, where we're saying this particular town or local authority has done quite well, and I think it's worth emulating.
Yes, thank you very much. If I can add to that, I think you want to be specific. I'll give you a very good example of one of the sustainable towns in Namibia, which is the Swakopmund town. Into local economy. Now, they are potential tourism, and that speaks to the environment. What provides the town heritage of a German heritage? They have all these aspects that actually complement their that in capitalizing on those issues. One needs to have a strategic approach that is intentional, that is deliberate, and at the end of the day can be able to speak to the needs of the individual and those of the people outside whom you need to serve and attract, which speaks to issues of branding that Retta has actually spoken about. It speaks to the face of that specific institution. This will feed in. But also what is more important is how the institution becomes resilient to the shocks of the outside environment, which we cannot control. For example, how do we respond to technological activities? How do we, encompass ourselves to understand that technology is overtaking us? One of the good examples that one can take is the city of Windhoek. I think the city of Windhoek has taken under Section 30 of the local authority to realize that technology is taking over, and fiber technology would be one of the issues. Instead of just concentrating on land development and your roads construction, but they've picked out fiber optics as one of the fastest internet offering in the city, and probably they would take that as a resource that they need to explore in order to make the city sustainable. I think these are some of the aspects that I could pick out for you that should definitely speak to issues of being intentional, being deliberate in our approach, but must speak to our environmental factors, of which I don't want to repeat what Retta has already said, and it actually encompasses all of those aspects that I've already alluded to, and what Retta has just mentioned.
Okay, perfect. Retta, I'm gonna come back to you quickly and talk about really. I think Moses has given us a little bit of a glimpse on really what goes into this, but what could I think be the best way practically for public and also private sector and even civil society to really also kind of be involved deeply into a transforming of a town? What understanding do all these three parties? You have got your public sector government level, and then you have your private sector as well as civil society, what really can they do to ensure that the particular town or small town or local authority in which they live and in which they operate becomes sustainable, not only then, but also in the long run?
If I can take that, Retta, quickly. I wanted to highlight the following.
Yes.
In terms of Namibia, when I'm talking about being intentional, one of the most important part is for us to understand how economically connected is Namibian towns and what are their comparative advantages in that regard. If you look at sectorizing or, an example of having potential economic zones for our institutions would actually propel the towns better. And a good example would be if we have to sectorize, if you have to put them into specific categories, for example, logistics, metals and extracts, tourism and hospitality would actually fit better in certain towns than in every other town. You can then also maybe segregate it to say service centers and agricultural hub. Those towns could be looking at, areas where they are stronger. You could be looking at business and also manufacturing hub. Now, within this, you would be attracting the private sector to definitely be intentional in their investment through public-private partnerships. A good example that I can give you is, for example, a town in the Eastern Cape called Alisedale, which is a small town of about 4,000 people. Their approach was to turn around an unfavorable economic context. Being a small railway junction town, Alisedale was faced with economic decline. Now, but in recognizing the agency of their development, they started partnering with institutions such as the Mantis Group in 2003 to develop a large tourism resort that would create employment opportunity and stimulate economic activity. Now, this would actually now attract, interest from many other sectors, not only private sectors, but NGOs and also the government itself, providing that leadership stability at the end of the day.
Okay. Thank you so much, Moses, for that. Riada, is it true that we then need to, first of all, sort out the public sector-wise before we can draw investors? Or can the investors, private investors, also start something out without necessarily getting the public, which is the government, obviously, having the ball rolling first?
I'm going to come from a slightly different perspective and explain just some of the issues that I have seen in Namibia specifically. Let's leave aside for a moment the rest of the world where I've done town transformations and look at what I've seen that has typically gone wrong. And then from that, want to kind of make some suggestions that complements what Moses has just said. So in the first instance, what I've seen has gone wrong is that in the first instance, the participants, and let's call it mainly the public sector, so represented through the town council for sure, the private sector through the local businesses, and typically in some of your towns, it's one business like the mines that Moses referred to, so it's a main anchor tenant, and then there's civil society. And of course, there are then kind of quasi-type institutes like, employment tribunals or kind of unions or things like that. But let's leave them under the bucket of civil society. So the biggest thing that happens there amongst those three stakeholder groups, there are misaligned expectations of where we're going. So whenever we create a future or want to create a future, whether it's for a company or whether it's for a town, we've got to first become clear amongst everybody involved of what is it that we expect that place to be or become. And I'm not talking about necessarily its end goal, but at least the foreseeable goal. So in 5 years, 7 years, whatever goal you want to set, those three groups must have the same view. So what I've seen often go wrong is that the public sector has a view and then the private sector has a very different view. And then they start working against one another. The second thing that has typically gone wrong, in my view, is that in terms of realistic implementation, the plans that are created are too ambitious. And look, I, for one, am a very ambitious person, and
Yeah.
I'm very kind of optimistic of what can be, but you have to walk before you can crawl. So I want to kind of almost say to the participants in this, everybody involved, is make sure that you actually set a realistic expectation. So align on what you want to do, all agree more or less on the same end state so we can work together, but then also be realistic of what is our first major milestone, and from there build further plans so we don't set ourselves up to fail from the beginning. The third thing, which is going to be a bit of an uncomfortable point, and it's going to refer to a slightly uncomfortable point we touched on last time, is unfortunately in my case, I've seen competition between the public sector and the private sector around ownership of who should lead town transformations. And then in the nicest possible way, almost seen that the behavior showed that people want the glory, but they don't want to do the hard work and the hard sweat, and want to see the leader and want everybody else to fall in line and do what they think is right.
Yep.
And this is what makes town transformation so complicated, is that your stakeholders must each understand their unique role in the process and do that well, and leave the other to do their part well. So I'm going to now try and tie myself a little bit towards what Moses said. And in my opinion is, in my view, the public sector in Namibia should create an investable environment. They should create the framework. They should create the policies. They should create the platform. But they need to leave a bit more space for the private sector in which to thrive, to create the actual employment opportunities that will then drive the economy. And then thirdly, your civil society needs to become less, if I may say, in the deepest respects, less entitled and less dependent, and actually become prepared to actually play their active part in looking after their water usage, looking after the environment, to throw away rubbish, look after their animals. So things that weigh down the council, pay their bills on time. These things that are kind of their duty to actually make sure that they respect the authority and the responsibility to enable the council to do what they do well. So I want to hand back to somebody else, and I've got a lot more to say on this, but I don't want to, there's so much to say, but I want to kind of perhaps open it up to others to contribute.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rita, for that. I think we lost Moses for a while. I think still connection issues. But Paul, do you want to say something, contribute something?
Yes, I just want to agree more on the previous speakers, what they have spoken. Very indeed informative. And I believe specifically when we're speaking about public and private sectors in terms of development, these two entities, they have to marry one another in order to realize the goals of the society where they govern or where they dwell. And by that, stated by that, we can get an example specifically like China. We look at China's development or how they have transformed. It is because of the cooperation between the government and the government and the private sectors. They cooperated together in order to achieve all those kind of development and emancipating people from the line of poverty into where they are now. Which I believe that if the government or public enterprises had that notions of allowing or incorporating all their visions together with the private sector and work on the same page, I believe we can really achieve certain goals in a shorter time. It can be realistic rather than just a dream. But as like Rita have said, that if we work out of egos, work out of who want to take the shine of a specific achievement, then we'll end up shooting ourselves. Because in terms of development, development cannot be achieved by one person. You need to work with the community, you need to work with different people, stakeholders, in order for such kind of prospects to be achieved. And now, in addition with that, also, I wanted to state that local towns or either local government authorities, they need to realize their potential. Like each and every divisions or either town, they do have their own strength. If they realize their own strength and capitalize onto their strength, with that strength, they can build something which can really elevate their locals in a different light. For example, I want to give an example here in South Africa where I'm staying. I'm from Namibia, but I stay here in South Africa. A town like Franschhoek. Franschhoek is a town which is in the mountain, but they realize that due to the beauty of the wine cellars which they have, the farming sectors, it have uplifted their town to a level whereby everyone, when you're in South Africa, which town you want to go to, which is a rich town, they will tell you Franschhoek is one of the richest towns.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it reach to that level? It's because of the cooperation between the local government and the public sectors. They realize the potential which their area have,
Mm-hmm.
and they use that to their advantage. I believe if Namibia can look at that, we can really achieve a lot of things in terms of development within our local societies.
Okay. Thank you so much, Paul. I think, Paul, you rightly put it that we must put aside our egos and try and come back and work together. But ideally also, this question I'm going to pose to you, I know Paul has given a lot of an example, but ideally I also want to get the practical side of things really. When we are saying, let's take an example of, and I know every town has its own competitive advantage, as Rieta has said, as Paul has also indicated, and also you, Rieta, has said. But ideally, I think there should be a ground level, right, where we're starting off as well to say, okay, this should be the first step. I think for those that, I think let's also speak to for those that are already on the transformation path, those that haven't started yet, and I think those that are still trying to figure out what to do. What would you say is really the practical steps that I think these small towns and local authorities need to start first to ensure that they run on that sustainability and transformation path? Rieta, over to you.
I'm going to draw a little bit from what Paul has just said, because what by implication, what he's saying is what I fully agree with, is your absolute starting point, your day one, is to actually take a very sober, but a very creative look about what have you got? What are your assets? And if I mean assets, I don't mean just fixed assets. Now, your assets could be you've got a beautiful environment. Your assets could be that you've got a legacy, a cultural history. You know, what is it that you've had? What buildings do you have? What land do you have? What skill set do you have in your population? What leadership quality do you have in your environment? What behaviors will be open or inviting? What behaviors are closed? So you have to really, on a very complicated scale, become very truthful of what is your starting point. What are your levels of income? How much is your levels of your local investment? Where does your money go? Where does the movement of people come from? Where is it positioned on a map? You know, how strategically important is it or not? And then from that current state, you can, exactly like Paul implied, begin to understand what can you leverage? So what can you actually play to the strengths of that environment? Or what must you artificially stimulate to accelerate if you don't have it at the moment? So let's say, for example, 100 years ago, the Franschhoek case that Paul was referring to would have been just a farming community. But over time, that farming community is transformed into a tourism community because of the beauty of the farms. So that is a very concrete example, but start with what you've got. But for that, be very sober about what of it, but also be very creative. So if I go for a moment to the Oranjemund case, just to bring it a bit closer to home, for example, Oranjemund sits in a unique situation where it's got ocean and river. And on top of that, it's got a lot of wind and sun for renewable energy. You know, so it's got a lot of mining skill that will suit engineering type components. It's got a hospital that will suit future medical services. So you have to begin to start now the positives, but also the negatives. That's your place to start.
All right. Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yes, no, I think, in my opinion, regarding the startup line for any local authorities, if they want to establish themselves in a very productive township or a progressive township, is that your policy, you know, everything what we do, it can only be sustainable if the policies are correct and if the policies which are enacted are realistic. Now, if the policies are very, very unfriendly with whatever the ideas which you want to establish within that local communities or local government, it will always not be reached. So in my personal opinion, I believe that the policies is the starter point. Make sure that the policy which you are drafting are policies which are very cohesive, which are very sustainable. Everyone can be practical, let me say like that. They are very practical and can be realized. Now, once you are done with the policies, then we need also to establish specifically to build the entrepreneurship mindset. I think that is one of the leakage which most of the people we are having especially in Namibia. We have the knowledge, but the interest of being entrepreneurs, it's lacking, and the support from the government and also to the entities or private companies which have already established themselves in a big realm. They are not supporting those one on the grassroots. If we can achieve that, I believe those township or either the grassroots of the township can be successful.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes. May I just compliment something that Paul said there? Because I think I kind of obviously kind of come from the perspective of actually when you've now started a town transformation program. But I absolutely agree with Paul that policy is very important. I think there are two precursors to both those points, and we've alluded to that in the previous question, but just to link that is the first starting point is you've got to get clear of the roles and responsibilities. And then from that, do an accountability framework. And to kind of say the roles and responsibilities, this is the public sector's role, this is the CEO of the town council's role, this is the mine's role, this is the society or other businesses' role. And then who's responsible for what? And then from that, clear policies. And from that, look at your current state that I referred to. But your starting point is whose role is what? Because otherwise we begin to work against one another, as we said in the previous discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Reda. Moses, while you were a little bit away, we were just talk. I don't think your connection today, you want us to really have a very good discussion. But either way, just to summarize while you're away, we're really looking at try to establish when we say a town or local authority need to be transformed, where should we start? And we had Rieta and Paul both bringing in their views to say we need to set up correct policies, be it also understanding not only these policies must be informed by putting out clear roles of who needs to do what and when do they need it, and then together bring those together and then run that journey together, both from the private sector, from the public sector, as well as civil society. I think just to pose a very, I don't know, I feel like I'm putting you in a corner today, but are you seeing that this is actually happening in Namibian local authorities and small towns where you have this kind of good working relationship between both the private and the public and the civil society?
Yes, thank you very much. I tend to agree with certain aspect, but I think before I get in there, I want to qualify your statement to say, yes, my network is not necessarily very stable at the moment. Okay. I should be pardoned for that. I think it's MTC and the red distributors that are actually playing on our on our session today. But I trust that that should not be an impediment now. I should think it's going to be stable. In terms of what actually has been shared, I want to highlight the following to say we must realize that the agenda for, urbanization in Namibia has highly been driven by government under the decentralization policy of government. And this is driven from a point of bringing services closer to the people, especially services that government offers. And in that regard, we've seen very reluctant participation from private sector. In such a sense, it's an issue of a chicken and egg. What comes first? Is it the chicken or the egg? Should we invest now when there is not enough population? Because, of course, when any private investor want to invest, they want return for their investment in the end. But then they have to scan the environment to understand whether that investment will be worth the returns that they will receive. So there is a little bit of skepticism of more of a foresight in what future will bring than what risk we are actually entering into. That's why most of our town will be driven around economic activities that are mining, that are tourism. And this is my assertion that I said earlier to say if that's the direction we need to go into, then we need to cluster certain aspect. What is the northern towns good at? For example, Nana is a green town. They have nice, good water resource. They could be an agricultural hub. Katima, Rundu, they could also be a tourism and an agricultural hub together with the logistics. Windhoek is a good service, center. And that should actually then be a government intentional project to look at how do we place certain investments that come into town in terms of foreign direct investment. then we can be able to say we will plug, different projects into different towns such that it complements the environment. I should be pleased to say the intentional activity that the president has just, put up in terms of the Namibia Investment Promotion Board.
Yeah.
I didn't understand much of it as I read through the documents. But when I looked at its intent in terms of what it was established to do, it was concentrating more on SMEs reactivation. It was reactivating SMEs. And I was appreciating the fact that at least there is a certain strategy being driven towards the informal sector. Maybe not well articulated or not well diversely put, but probably it's a strategy that might be able to work. At least there's some attention that I should be able to acknowledge. There's some attention being given to informal sector that will be able to drive local economies in various areas. I think in most aspects, that is only one thing that I can put up to say. Mostly our economies are driven by, or the establishment of our towns are driven by government because of services, putting up offices, home affairs, and all have you, finance and all that under the decentralization policy.
Okay.
And within that, we would realize that the private sector mostly would be skeptic. It's an issue of an egg and a chicken. What comes first?
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Moses. Reda, I'm going to pose this to you, right? And I think we are a little bit running out of time as well. But this question I have to ask before we we leave. But so then, I think what promises then do we need to make to each other, right? Government to say if then there is this a little bit of for a bit of a little if then there is this mistrust between both government and the private sector where we are thinking there might be competition. What promises then should each other party make to one another to ensure that it doesn't just become, okay, you need to go first and then I follow, or the private sector need to go first and then government follow. So what needs, I'm sure this is kind of a very difficult question, but I really want to hear your take on it.
Again, these are very complicated matters because what Moses speaking to is a historic component whereby the choice of public sector governance on a national level has led to 2 decades where the public sector has been driving economic development, which is not normally a real kind of sustainable approach. And again, I'm not looking to accuse anybody, but that means that your private sector over the last 20, 30, 40 years have become used to the public sector leading strategy, which Moses is referring to. So unfortunately, we've got a very deep national bias towards the public sector needing to drive it, and then the private sector come and not taking any risk. That is something on a very high level that needs to be readdressed. Like Moses, I also don't know in intimate detail what the NIPDB is going to approach, but definitely in my dealings with them, I can see that they're beginning to shift that balance so that there's greater responsibility placed on the private sector going forward to be co-responsible. I'm going to make a prediction that I think regulation and law maybe even will become such that private sector will become accountable to actually drive economic and socioeconomic development through job creation, through the co-solve of socioeconomic issues, and maybe they will come under the guise of public-private partnerships. But I gotta think is at the moment, because we're looking to rebalance what has been, mistrust exists because the private sector kind of feel it's the public sector's responsibility, and unfortunately the public sector created that habit, which we now need to fix. And trust will not come until we actually on paper can be very clear and to say this is what we expect from one another. This is where we can trust one another. Here's transparency in the flow of money. Here's transparency in the ownership of money. Because everybody's thinking somebody else is going to take for themselves, and that it will not serve the true purpose that's stated on purpose. So until we can get to a place of clear accountability, clear responsibility, and clear accountability for impact, we're not going to immediately quickly fix that issue of trust.
Okay. Paul, you want to jump in there?
Yes.
I think.
Yep. Sorry.
Moses, you want to say something? Maybe.
Yes, I mean, just in complementing what Reta has actually said, what I think the most precursors or the most important thing in order for us to really realign this is to understand that as much as we create that platform as a public institution or as government, our policies needs to be very, very flexible in accepting certain areas, and we don't need to be rigid in our policies. That's number one. We need to be, like I said, we need to be intentional. We need to be deliberate in our policy interventions because of the dynamics of our demographics and our historic legacies in this system that Namibia has. That's number one. Number two would definitely be a leadership that is highly committed and highly understand its role and responsibilities. And that role definition is what you would see now that comes to the conflicting issues where certain CEOs would be suspended without even going to the core of the matter. Now, if we understand the roles and the responsibilities defined very well, we would not be able to, be having all these, interruptions within the system. So there is that polarization that leads to a certain aspect that might lead again to investors' confidence, not wanting to take a step further, but rather keeping it to their playing their cards closer to their chest. And I think in more robust aspect is where institutions such as local authorities or the government itself must be able to continue providing oversight and environment that propels or that actually accepts investments within the area that it will fit in, fitted to an environmental aspect of that specific institution and the demographics themselves. At an operational level, what's key is probably to have a focused strategy that is driven within a context of what is it that we want to achieve as a town or as an organization? What are our dynamics? What are our comparative advantages? And this would lead to an institution that will probably be sustainable. And I'm sure we can be able to attract investments and become better institutions in the future.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Moses. Paul, you...
Yes. Now I want to start by saying that I applaud my sister Reta and my brother Moses what he have submitted. It's very profound, and indeed that is the key areas which the institutions need to look at, specifically accountabilities. If as much as we can come up with ideologies or come up with certain policies which we want to establish, but if you lack accountability and responsibility in order to make sure that these things, you see them pass by or either you achieve them, there's nothing will take forth. And that's where many investors are discouraged because they foresee that many of the people who are in power, they lack responsibility, they lack accountabilities. In that way, we're not going to, they're not going to get gravitated to such kind of ideas or either a plan which the local authorities might have in the way. That is my belief that if the local government can have real responsibilities on whatever plan which they have, they want to achieve within the local development, it will really pave a good way for the future or the development of the towns.
Okay.
And another point which I wanted to say on that one, on my conclusion, is that if the local government itself do not create an environment which is user friendly for people to express themselves in building or either developing the local towns, there's nothing going to happen. There's nothing which will be achieved. Until then, they create that platform, they create that environment whereby everyone can chip in and bring their professionalisms, whatever they can bring on board to make sure that these goals are being attained.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. We are unfortunately running out of time. I also had wanted to talk to. I think we have seen this, especially in Windhoek, where we have seen the land question again and again coming up. But I think because we are really pressed with time today, I think that will be another conversation for another day. Maybe the very, very last question, and also with that, ideally, I also would like you to also give your closing remarks. I think then needs to talk to, say we have in our audience a CEO of any small town or municipality, or we've got mayors, we've got council members that are tuning in today. I think what would then be the message, Arietta, from you, first of all, that would say they should, looking at both that are just starting up and also those that are on the transformational path, what would be your word of caution, word of advice, things to consider? What would be your point of departure to them?
Yes, and again, so sorry, there's a little bit of a breakup in the line, but I do think I've heard your question, so I hope I'm answering the right question.
Okay.
But I think my word of caution would be is don't underestimate how complicated town turnarounds are. They're very complicated components, and they should be treated with respect from all participants and honor the complexity, and therefore have patience with one another. But I think also to be brave, like let's say at the moment I have a private sector client who is in decline, the company's in decline. And it's a very difficult thing for me to say to them, but you need a turnaround strategy. You actually need to do something very different. And therefore, you need to be honest with yourself that you've got the right leadership around the table. So my word of caution would be is, I think Paul implied it, as did Moses, turning around a town is an altruistic purpose. You're doing it for a future of a country, you're doing it for a future of people. And therefore you have to ask yourself, do I have the right people with the right skill around the table? And to be very respectful of that responsibility, because it's a unique but very complicated opportunity that should be treated as such. So
Right.
that will be my parting comment.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Rita. Moses, you've heard from her.
Yes,
Let's get
I think Rita couldn't have said it better. What I would probably give in parting is probably to say, you want to run a local authority. I think the best thing you need to have as an individual is high emotional intelligence. That's very, very key to ensuring that you will navigate through all the challenges that comes through, because this is a field where you play with reality. It's not desk issues. This is real problems with real people.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, I think one needs to understand the governance structure, that good corporate governance must be key in ensuring that the institution or the individual has an understanding of how you're supposed to operate, and the roles and the definitions are defined. Lastly, I would re-emphasize the aspect of what Rita has just said. Don't underestimate the complexity of the challenges that you would be facing in running an organization or in regenerating or running a town sustainably. So in that, if you look for a future where you want to be a successful individual, I think those are some of the elements you will have to look for. There are more, but I think those for me would stand out very, 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 very importantly. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Paul, thank you so much as well for coming through. You are not part of the starting line, but I think thank you so much for joining in. You've provided with such very, very, very necessary and good insight. Just your closing remarks as well.
No, I think thank you very much again for having me on the platform. My cue line will be that as the people or the towns where they want to start, you need to have a very concrete risk assessment team. Like you have to make your correct risk assessment of whatever you want to do, and then you should not deflect on such kind of commitment which you want to achieve. Specifically, if you don't make accurate risk assessment, that's where we find that most of the time, in a short time of a running, the town falls short, or you don't achieve what you want to achieve. So we with that in mind, I say that if we can be more flexible and have a proper team who can look at what can go wrong in the future and what can we do before the start, I think we can achieve whatever we want to achieve. Thank you very much for the opportunity again.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Paul, Rieda, as well as Moses, for joining us today. This was another edition of the Namibian Conversation, where we brought to you today how to really tackle town transformation. We have heard from our respected speakers who are both actively involved in the transforming of towns, as well as those that advise towns on how to transform a local town, or a local authority, or a small town. And with that today, we are joined by Moses Machai, the CEO of Otjiwarongo, as well as Rieta van der Schijf. And that's it for today. Next time again.